What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of How the Chick Stole the Pod. I'm Daniel Donabedian, joined, as always, by Dr. Justin Quinn. And today, we got recurring guest, Bobby Kravitsky. What's up, Bobby?
Gentlemen, what's going on? Always good to come on the pod.
Good to have you.
Yeah, good to have you. Finally, we are around a month away from the start of the NBA regular season. And we are in a lull, I would say, for the Celtics. But still, we got news to talk about. Some stuff regarding the end of Eurobasket, and then the potential end of a free agency saga that we have talked about before. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some of the Celtics' outlook for the new season, what the veterans might be doing. And yeah, we can call them veterans now because Jaylen Brown and guys like that have been in the league longer than you might think. But yeah, to start, we'll get into the smattering of news, I'd say. But first up is Shams dropped a new report about Jonathan Kuminga, which relates to the Celtics because every report is kind of saying that Al Horford's headed to the Warriors. It's going to happen, but they just need to wrap up this Kuminga mess. And Shams most recently said that the Warriors are kind of ramping up their effort to bring in Kuminga. And Joe Lacob actually went out to meet with Kuminga face-to-face. But we've talked about this so much. I mean, the story keeps on going. How do you guys see this ending, and maybe when do you think it's ending? I guess we can start with you, Justin.
Well, for me personally, it's going to come to the conclusion of me no longer writing, presumably, when talking about Al Horford writing the team, which I won't say I'm looking forward to, but for his sake, I think I would like to see some resolution. I know it's no fun to have your plans kind of stuff, and it's hopefully ending for him in that regard.
Yeah, you have anything on that, Bobby?
Yeah, so the most interesting report to me came from Anthony Slater, also of ESPN now, saying that Kuminga told the Warriors he'll take their 3-year offer around $75 million if they flip the team option to a player option. And it's going to be interesting to see if they ultimately buckle on that, because through his agent, he reportedly gave assurances that he understands that means signing up for potentially multiple years, barring a trade, of inconsistent minutes and coming off the bench with this core of Curry and Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green. And the plan is for Al Horford, once he signs, to start at center. So Kuminga saying that I'm on board with this. I will commit to this team for multiple years, not just gut it out for one season, as long as you meet me with some sort of an ask on my part, some sort of an olive branch. I would think ultimately the Warriors view it as more valuable to have him in the mix, like I said, including for trade possibilities, and that they ultimately give him that player option. But ultimately, we'll see. But my prediction has swung around from he waits until the last second, October 1st being the deadline to sign the qualifying offer. It's 1 year, and then he has a no trade clause, and he can get to unrestricted free agency. Now I ultimately think, Daniel, that the Warriors will come around on that, and all of a sudden Kuminga could be in the Bay for multiple seasons.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how this will finally end. I feel like we've been talking about this for like maybe the last 2 or 3 months. Wish the best for Horford, no matter how it shakes out. But speaking of the Warriors, former Warrior Dennis Schroeder made some headlines at Eurobasket. He and Team Germany defeated Turkey 88-83 in the championship game. Isaac Bonga randomly had a very great game. I think he was voted the player of the game. He dropped 20 points. I believe that was a team high for Germany. And Dennis Schroeder, former Celtic as well, had the dagger jumper against Turkey. Just wondering what you guys think about Schroeder's performance throughout the tournament, because I saw a lot of people online being like, this has the case for a Hall of Fame career internationally, because obviously the Basketball Hall of Fame doesn't just take the NBA into account. So just wondering, Bobby, yes, first, do you think there's legitimacy to that argument?
I do. I think if you're not following it closely and you're just loosely aware on social media that Dennis Schroeder is a legitimately great international player. You probably find this ridiculous, but one, he is a legitimately great international player. You said it yourself, Dean. It's the Basketball Hall of Fame, not the NBA Hall of Fame. This is someone who, if you rewind the clock, not long after his Celtics career, and that was on the heels of turning down that big offer from the Lakers, he played his way back into the NBA and to his next contract via what he was doing on an international stage. So to win another championship with Germany and look as good as he continues to over there, I absolutely think that he's at least building a legacy that makes for a compelling Hall of Fame case.
Don't have too much to add to that. He's going to make it in, I think. He doesn't just have those titles under his belt. He's also an MVP. That combined, I think, with what he's done at the NBA level is easily enough to get him in. There are always going to be people who don't get that it's not the NBA Hall of Fame, and maybe they should make one. I don't know. It just seems like it's not that hard to understand. There's basketball in other places.
Yeah, I feel like that always comes up with the Al Horford debate because people are like, oh, will he make it? And if you take into account his back-to-back national titles and now, of course, his Celtics championship, I feel like that is a no-brainer, pretty obvious. But, yeah, just one last piece of news. Like I said before, there hasn't been a ton in the NBA world. But Adam Silver did have to walk back a recent comment regarding the whole Kawhi Leonard aspiration Clippers cap circumvention drama that's been going on. And when Silver was initially asked about it, I think it was at the press conference, he said that he had, quote, never heard of aspiration. But now, recently, he actually corrected himself and said that he has heard of the brand. He's actually just never heard of them in context with the accusations that happened. It was a pretty surprising turnaround and a pretty bad faux pas from the commissioner of the NBA, who, as Justin and I talked about last week, or a few weeks ago, he's pretty well in tune with the NBA. And I mean, he's well spoken. So to see him mess up like this is kind of interesting. So just how big of a mess do you think this situation is for Silver, Bobby?
So maybe I'm being dense here, but as soon as he said it the first time, I've never heard of aspiration, my immediate reaction is that is so irrelevant to the matter here, whether or not you're familiar with the company that is committing fraud and potentially involved in circumventing the salary cap of your league, whether or not you're familiar with them to begin with has no bearing on this. But I also think we understand that it's just another way, and he's delivered multiple messages where the subtext is very clearly, we're not looking to, at a minimum, lay the hammer on Steve Ballmer and the Clippers. And maybe there's a punishment, maybe there's a slap on the wrist, maybe more comes out and it's more severe than that. But the messaging, including him saying, I understand we're the NBA, we're not the court of law. It doesn't have to be guilty until proven innocent. We're going to start the other way around. That's him letting you know, at a minimum, what the NBA wants to do here to resolve the situation.
Yeah, don't have too much more to add to that other than he's not been doing great lately in a way that is really uncharacteristic for him. I'm sure there are already conspiracy theories percolating up because of that slip. I think it was just a slip, to be completely honest, to Bobby's point. But it was weird. All of this has been weird.
Yeah, I think maybe this wouldn't be as big a deal, but as we've talked about in prior episodes, his comment about the highlight league and like it's a highlight sport.
That's the one. I think Justin was just alluding to that. Daniel, I was going to bring it up if you didn't. I couldn't believe that he would say that. And on top of how we react to it, if you're a broadcast media partner that just forked over this record-setting contract, and I know each time it's a new deal, it's a record setter, but how do you feel about hearing a comment like that? You can just watch the highlights. I wouldn't love it.
Yeah, I was shocked by that. I mean, it just sounds like they're prioritizing social media over the networks, and I can get that with like the younger audiences, and a lot of fans do interact with the game that way, but it just undersells the whole regular season and just boiling it down to little 10, 15-second clips. And I mean, it's how we create NBA media where it's more hot takey and less analysis and less talk about the actual game and more about little clips. But yeah, we talked about this. I think just that mistake plus this new aspiration thing is not a great look for Adam Silver. Don't think he's had a great summer, but I guess we'll see how they rule the aspiration stuff whenever that may happen. I don't know. Could be before the season, could be far away from now. But regardless of the Silver situation, now we're going to hopefully get back to Celtics talk because a season is coming. With Tatum or not, it is coming pretty soon. But before we get into a closer look, as always, we're going to go with the steal. So our guest, Bobby, this is when you can steal the podcast and talk about whatever you may like, basketball related or not. So the floor is yours.
Oh, I do love that it's a wide open forum, but I am going to keep it to basketball and the Celtics. And so for me, I know this is a topic that you guys have spoken brilliantly on, but I would like to rehash because I think it's an ongoing discussion until we get a verdict. And even then, we'll see how it plays out between Simons and Payton Pritchard. But just, Justin, we can start with you on what is your lean on, if you're Joe Mazzulla, what do you think the best way to approach those two is in terms of who starts and who comes off the bench?
So, full stop, I think Payton has earned the right to start the season starting. But I also think that he's a smaller guard. Simons has a couple of inches on him, a couple of pounds on him, and I think there will be matchups where he will get the start, and they will be a little bit more matchup based, I think, with who starts in the backcourt than they have for a while now.
Yeah, at the beginning of this, I think I was maybe leaning more towards Simons, but then there are all the rumors like, oh, he might not be here by the season start, but now it seems pretty clear that he should be here. I could see the argument either way, given that Simons has always been a starter pretty much in his career and Pritchard's always come off the bench. But I think both of them are going to get minutes either way, so I don't particularly mind. And like Justin was saying, maybe they'll change it based up on matchups. But I guess for opening day, I would guess they might roll with Pritchard, but I'm open to either, really.
So I've written about this for Forbes and Hardwood Houdini, and you make the case for either side. And when I think there are two major factors at play here. One is Payton Pritchard has been vocal about, and true to his mindset, I don't care if I start or come off the bench. I'm good either way. And Anfernee Simons, we haven't spoken to him yet. He might, at least internally, whether he acknowledges it publicly or not, be someone who's been a starter his whole career and not love the idea in a contract year of coming off the bench and being the sixth man. So that's one factor. The next is the Celtics have to do their best to try and gauge what the market is for Simons as a free agent and how open they are to re-signing him in that price range. If they're not, and they don't view a construct where he's one of the 4 highest paid players on the team is how they rebuild a sustainable contender, I think at a minimum, you can still start Simons, that's fine. But in the closing lineup, you might want Pritchard anyways, independent of that variable. But definitely, if you've already decided this guy is not going to be here beyond this season, maybe beyond February, then I think you definitely should be at least closing games with Payton Pritchard and getting him those reps.
John Corrales made the point on Locked On Celtics recently, too, that if he is coming off of the bench, he will basically be the dynamic engine of the offense, will be able to get all the shots he wants. And as Daniels made the point, he's going to have the minutes either way. So he might actually be better off coming off the bench and competing for shots with the starters.
It's the role I would love him in.
That's a good point about the contract year too, Bob. Yeah, I didn't think about that, but maybe they'll try and showcase his abilities a little more in the starting lineup. But I think most of us could agree that if we got to pick the better player, it's probably Pritchard. Does that make a difference with starting? Sometimes, but maybe in this case it won't, especially since this will be such an experimental year for the Celtics. And I mean, speaking of that, for our closer look part of the podcast, we're going to get into the veterans of the Celtics. And I'm just going to lay out who the veterans are, because when you think of veterans and Celtics, you might think of Horford, but now he might not even be on the team. But yes, I mean, they have more veterans than you might think. So we're hoping to get into Jaylen Brown, of course, Derrick White, who's entering his 9th year in the NBA, I believe. Then, of course, as we were just saying, Payton Pritchard, Anfernee Simons, as we just mentioned. And then some of the more lower end guys, well, Sam Hauser, of course. But then like Chris Boucher, Xavier Tillman, guys who have an opportunity this year. But I guess just to start, of course, we should mention their 1A guy at the moment with Tatum out, Jaylen Brown. He should be their primary scoring option. I mean, his whole career pretty much, he's talked about being the guy on the team. And it seemed like with Tatum by his side, it wouldn't really happen. But as things have happened now, he will be the guy and he'll have that shot. So what are you guys kind of expecting from Jaylen Brown this year? And what are we going to put his ceiling at? Like, do we think all NBA's in the cards? I think all-star would be pretty fair game, given that he's made it most of the time the last like 5 years with Tatum healthy. But maybe Justin, if you want to start.
So in this case, I think it's complicated. The Steve Bulpett article interview with Paul Pierce had Pierce talking about how with that expanded role comes greater responsibility. And what that looks like for Jaylen could look like him being the man, right? He could take over, like put up near MVP level numbers, and it would be great for Jaylen. But it wouldn't be so great for the Celtics, and I don't think it would be great for Jaylen being seen as a leader of a team rather than a strong 1B, which he already has shown he can be, right? What he needs to do is something closer to what Jason Tatum does when he is basically the focal point of the offense. And that's just mainly attracting double coverage wherever he can and making his teammates better as a result of it. That's something he's shown us he can do. I mean, if you think back to the Knicks game when he kind of took on that role after Jason Tatum went down, that's exactly what we're looking for. And he's not going to do that every night. He's just not going to. But if he does that most of the time in his way, I think that's the best case scenario that we're going to see from Brown this season.
So even if the numbers are different, Daniel, I think that's going to be the approach. Again, the stat line might not read like it did that game 5 against New York, but the mentality, I think that's how he's going to operate on a consistent basis as the number one option and the top scorer and the guy who has the ball in his hands the most. I also think that last season he made his most significant leap in terms of handling the double team. And when he gets blitzed, being able to kick it out and make the right play. You combine that with the growth we've seen in recent years of him being able to turn his ability to generate paint touches into making the right read on kickouts, and just how much he's evolved in that part of his game. This is clearly an opportunity that he is excited about. And I don't believe for a second that he's going to turn this into, look how many points I can score and let me try and fill the void of Tatum in that manner. I think he wants to be the rising tide that lifts all boats, that makes everyone better. And that's why it's such a massive development, how he handles this for the Celtics. The other part of the equation here is in that game 5, for example, he's pressing Jalen Brunson and picking him up full court, and he's really prided himself and stayed engaged defensively by guarding the other team's best perimeter player. Is that sustainable over the course of a full season to take on more of an offensive burden and also provide that at the defensive end? So what does growth look like, and how much of a workload is he actually able to put on his plate? I think that all NBA is certainly attainable, but he played 63 games a year ago, and now the workload's going to get heavier as he gets a year older. So we'll have to see. But offensively in particular, that's where I'm most confident in terms of what his mindset and mentality is going to be, trying to bring everyone along with him.
Yeah, and I mean, he's coming off that surgery too, but should be good to go by camp. But I'm glad you brought up the defense side of the ball, Bobby, because I wanted to mention that, like, he prides himself guarding the opponent's best player. And now there's no Drew Holiday. There's no Kristaps Porzingis. There's probably no Al Horford, no Cornette. The Celtics got objectively weaker on the defensive side of the ball. And Jaylen Brown's going to be their captain and leader. And like I said, he likes guarding the main guy on defense. So they're going to really need him to continue to be solid there because they added Anfernee Simons, who is not a great defender. And they're just going to need somebody to step up in Drew's absence pretty much. But they will still have Derrick White, and that's the next player I wanted to talk about. As I said before, he's entering his 9th year in the league, and I think every Celtics fan is happy he's here. I know there are some rumors about trades and all of that, but Brad Stevens made it pretty clear he is part of the foundation of the team. So what are you guys expecting from Derrick this year? Because he's probably the second option on this team. Either one of you guys, by the way.
I wasn't sure who you wanted to throw the ball to.
No.
Think about it.
All right, thank you, Doctor. So with Derrick, I mean, if I'm allowed to be lame here, I'd sign up for the exact same type of production as a season ago and as we've come to expect from him. Now, it's also worth noting that this is someone who at times will go through different funks and slumps. And last year, he was very candid about, I was kind of losing my love for basketball for a little bit. And I think he talked about it because it became easier and easier to spot as he was getting further into that. And then credit to him, he was able to, and no one does it alone, but he was able to pull himself out of that and get back to being that Derrick White that we expect on a game-by-game basis. So you understand that there might be something like that along the way. And the Celtics, certainly, he's a prime example to me of you want to manage the workload and not put too much mileage on core members of your roster's tires this season with the long game in mind. But as far as production, certainly it could go up in terms of shots and points and different things. But ultimately, I think that we have a firm grasp of who Derrick White is as a player and what he delivers.
The thing that I will add to that is that when I was talking about how it might look different for Jaylen to do the Jason Tatum thing, when I said that, I think the ball will be in his hands less. Not just because his handle is, a little suspect in certain areas, and he's probably not the person you want bringing the ball up the court for the entire season all the time. I think Derrick is going to be much more of a true point guard this season. And I think they're also going to be doing what the general NBA is doing, which is trying to get into their possessions faster, get up the court faster, and generally be faster than Jason Tatum walking the ball up the court. So I think we're going to see a faster version of Derrick. I think we're going to see more assists from him. And I think he's going to be taking on the role of the team's best defender. Those blocks are going to come real handy from him in a season where we don't have the kind of reliable rim protection that we've had in the past. Don't get me wrong, Keda has shown he is a lot better, but he is not the last best chance to stop an offensive play that you want out there by himself. Chris Boucher will be pretty good in that regard as well, picking up the slack, but we're going to have to see a lot more team defense. So I also expect him to be a lot more active, Derrick, on the defensive side of the ball as well.
Yeah, I think Derrick's kind of been the glue guy for them following the 2022 finals. And this year is going to be no different. I mean, if anything, he's going to be more important. They're going to need his three-point shooting as always. And like Bobby said, he can go through some slumps, which would especially hurt them this year. But they need that shot blocking. They need his aggressiveness on defense because, as I mentioned before, the Celtics are weaker on that side of the ball. And they're not going to have Tatum to make up for it on offense. So they're going to need Derrick very badly. And probably behind Brown and Derrick next for scoring is going to be Payton Pritchard, the reigning sixth man of the year. He's just had a pretty meteoric rise for his career. And that could continue this year as he should get as many minutes, if not more, given Tatum's absence. But I guess, Bobby, you could start. What are you expecting from Pritchard this year? I mean, we already kind of talked about the whole starting, not starting dilemma, but that aside, just what do you think he could do this year?
So what I'm fascinated to hear from him when we get to media day, he came in last year at that time and said, I've got 2 goals in particular. And one is offensively, I want to be more efficient shooting threes off the dribble. And he was top 5 in that category among, I believe, players who took a minimum of 2.5 attempts per game. So mission accomplished. And then he talked about the need to improve defensively. And I did a one-on-one with him right before he got the 6-man award. And I talked about how, I don't know if you see it the same way, Payton, but I felt like this was your best season defensively. And what do you attribute that to? And he talked about it all started with his work in the gym, and in particular, being able to add more muscle to get stronger. And it showed because he got more opportunities and held up against all these different body types, including Luka Doncic when they played the Lakers. He did well against Cade Cunningham against Detroit. He guarded Shea in that loss in Boston as well as anyone on the team, to take it for what it's worth, given how that game unfolded. But there was real significant growth in what was already the best part of his game defensively, and that's his ability to be this on-ball pest. And I think he became more versatile in that role in terms of who he could guard and that catalog of players that you could put him on. So I'm curious to see what are his goals this season on both sides of the ball, because he has a track record of saying, this is what I've put the work in for the offseason to go after, and then making it happen and taking significant leaps on whatever fronts those are.
Yeah, the only other thing I'll add to that, too, is he's also going to deal with a lot more defensive pressure than he has been used to in the past as well, because there's just going to be less reliable shooting options out there with him at any given time. So I'll be keeping an eye on that. But if he can hold up against that, I think our colleague Noah Delzell's prediction of him potentially having an all-star ceiling, he might get close to it if he doesn't quite make it.
Yeah, as I've learned since Payton Pritchard came to the Celtics, you should not cap his abilities. You should not limit what you think he's capable of, because I'll admit, when he first signed that contract, that extension, I was like, oh, I don't know if this is going to be like a great deal. And it's turned out to be an absolute home run. I mean, they're only paying him like, what, $7 million a year. So
yep.
I'm going to learn from my mistakes and not assume anything Pritchard can't do. But as we mentioned with Pritchard before about the whole starting debacle, there's also Anfernee Simons, who is sneaky, like a vet in the NBA. I mean, he looks young. I think he has a bit of a baby face, but he's been around for like 6 or like 7 seasons, I think. But he's a bit of a question mark for the Celtics. I mean, Brad Stevens alluded to it. Like, this is a guy on the Blazers who hasn't been part of great teams necessarily, at least like in the last 2 or 3 years. And this is a team that's not primetime much, and they're playing at like 10 p.m. Eastern sometimes. So Celtics fans aren't really catching these Blazers games. So they might not know what to expect from Simons. He's a bit of a question mark, especially since there's so much talk about moving him. But now that he's probably here to stay for at least the deadline, what do you guys think about Simons and what he could add to this new Celtics squad? Justin, you can start if you want.
So I think he is one of several guards, in the Cam Thomas mold, who I think the general consensus around the league, doesn't matter how much you can put on the board, if you can't defend, you aren't going to get one of the larger contracts that, nothing even close to what he's getting now, even, I think. I think he's like 22, 23 million maybe would be the absolute ceiling of that kind of a player in this NBA cap environment. But I do think he can defend better than he has often when he's been playing for nothing in a team that doesn't really have much of a direction, has a confusing hierarchy, which he was kind of at the top of, but at the same time, he was also clearly not the priority in terms of development. So all of that, I think, really did not do his value as a player any favors. I do think that a point of emphasis with him, I hope, is going to be showing that when the stakes do matter, and it's a contract year, that he can defend. And I would not be surprised if he ends up re-signing with Boston at a much more team-friendly number, somewhere north of the full mid-level exception for next season, but maybe short of the $20 million offer. that helps the Celtics in terms of their cap situation. But I think that is going to happen because he is going to impress people with his ability to play on both ends of the floor. I still think he's going to be a bit of a defensive liability just because it's hard to get out of that kind of a habit. And he hasn't really had the best examples, but he's going to.
Yeah, I think that offensively, he is a perfect fit for Joe Mazzulla and for a team that wants to play faster, as Justin noted earlier. So that having someone who has experience being the top option on a team, and also his ability to create for himself off the dribble and knock down threes effectively, both off the bounce and coming off of screens and off the catch, as a very effective dynamic shooter in that regard. So I think he's an ideal fit on that side of the ball. And then we all know what the $1 million question is that Justin hit on there. What does he do defensively? He ended up on a pretty damn good defensive team in Portland this season that was top 10 in opponent points per game. And we're still talking about this is a guy that hasn't shown interest on that side of the ball. Now, it wasn't a contract year, and Portland wasn't ultimately all that competitive, with the big playoff picture in mind. So maybe things change all of a sudden because the situation certainly has for him. But again, as you noted, Justin, those guys that are one-way players, and especially guards that are 6'3" and they just score the ball and that's it really, that's not someone who's getting $20 million a year. So I think he's in line for a significant pay cut, even if this season goes particularly well. And that's where, things come into play of if the Celtics enjoy having him in their work environment, if he shows a commitment on defense and they look at the numbers and the cap sheet and decide that this is something that's tenable, I do think it's possible that he's in Boston beyond the trade deadline and beyond just this season. But we've got to see how it all unfolds, including he could have such a good season with the Celtics that the market is too robust for him ultimately to stay here.
Yeah, and I think if anybody can add some defensive intensity to his game, it's definitely Joe Mazzulla. And I mean, he can obviously make use of his three-point abilities, as we've seen with the Celtics offense. But yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting year for him. But I think it should work out. I don't know what's going to happen at the deadline. And like you were saying, Bobby, maybe he is so good that he plays his way out of the Celtics in a way. But it's just going to be another interesting question mark in a season filled with them for the Celtics. But up next is a guy the Celtics have been invested in since his G League days, Sam Hauser. Like Simons, some people weren't convinced he'd be on the roster come starting night or opening night. But I think it's pretty safe to say he will be now. I mean, he's one of the leftover members from the championship core. We obviously all know what he can do from the three-point line. And I would say last year, within the three-point arc, he also upped his game with some jumpers that felt like they always went in from the mid-range. And a guy who might be a little better defensively than people give him credit for. But what are you guys expecting out of Hauser this year? Will he maybe crack into the starting lineup possibly? Good start with you, Bobby.
So that is the most interesting question. Does he start? I think it's most likely between him and Chris Boucher. Maybe Josh Minott plays his way into that equation to the point where he jumps both of them in this conversation. But that is going to be fascinating to see. And as Justin talked about earlier, it could be matchup based, where on this night, it's okay that we're undersized at that 4 spot and we're rolling with Hauser and we don't have the most balance. We're a little bit concerned about what's going to happen on the defensive glass, but this gives us the best chance to win and is the easiest way to navigate minutes and managing the rotation. And on other nights, we're going double big with Boucher at the 4 to start the game. That's going to be fascinating to see. And then with Hauser himself, there's 3 developments that I want to monitor. One is that he did get more comfortable making plays off the dribble last season. And I'm sure I've said it on your podcast before, Justin, but players who are just shooters and one-dimensional have been phased out of the game. You don't see the Jason Caponos of the world anymore, with all due respect to him. And Hauser has certainly grown and made appreciable strides in that regard. He's going to have to continue to do that. And he's going to have more opportunities to next season. And it's not just being able to step into a mid-range shot, it's being able to make the right read as a facilitator. And another one is they're going to need him on the glass. Losing Jason Tatum, the rebounder, creates a massive void that the Celtics are going to have to fill collectively. Hauser's going to have to be a big part of that, especially on nights when he starts. And so it's going to be very interesting to see on those two fronts. And the third one is defensively, because he looked really good in his role 2 years ago. Then he had the lower back injury where it would flare up on him at times, and he worked through that. He put that in the rear view, but he was not the same level of defender, in my opinion, as he was 2 seasons ago. So I'm curious to see what it looks like this year, especially with more opportunities.
Yeah, it's the more opportunity aspect of it that's really interesting me too, because if he can scale his game up and stay efficient and engaged, and as you point out, good on both ends, then he's going to make a lot more money when this contract is up. But he's also probably going to take on a bigger role, and I think this is a tryout season for him as well. I considered putting him in with a developmental shall we say, prospects on the roster, even though some of them aren't really prospects anymore. And if that all works out, then he might actually pass Payton Pritchard as being the best contract in the league. Currently is my opinion for that. But these are the kinds of players you have to have on your roster in this cap environment. And I think what we're going to see is worst case scenario, and this is the absolute worst case scenario, he becomes part of the solution to the next big man that is going to be starting for the Boston Celtics when they contend again as one of the primary trade assets going out that is attracted to a team that maybe needs some perimeter shooting, that isn't worried about having him fill such a big role in the future, because he's going to have to if he stays with Boston, in my opinion.
Yeah, and to just get to another guy who could potentially start for the Celtics, but I mean, probably not. One of their newest additions, Chris Boucher from the Toronto Raptors, who the Celtics have actually encountered a good amount throughout their Atlantic Division battles and also the playoffs in the bubble. He could maybe fill in as somewhat of a big man in the starting lineup. It seems to be Keita's role for now. But what are you guys expecting out of Chris Boucher, the newest Celtic, I believe? Justin, I think you could start on this one if you want.
So he's not going to start. He has never started. He is not going to start starting now. It's not happening. So it's definitely, if someone else takes the starting role, it's almost certainly not going to be Chris Boucher. That said, he can fill that role, and he probably will play a lot of the five with the Celtics. If they want to go with a true five out that's reliable, then that's probably be it. But even though I think he's like 6'9", he's very, very slight. He weighs less than I do, and I'm 6'2", and I'm not obese. I mean, but yeah, he does not weigh enough to bang with the likes of centers built like Keita, for example. So he's going to have kind of like, he can play down to the three. I don't know how much he can do it anymore, but he has played the three. And I think in the championship Toronto season, he played a lot of three for them. He's going to be kind of like the most flexible guy on the team, I think, in terms of what his role is, but it's always going to be coming off the bench. And really, I think what he's trying to do is get one more big payday, maybe with Boston. Maybe he'll look to extend into the future with a slightly better contract than he's playing for Boston on now. But it's not going to be much. The main thing I'm looking for him is, can he keep playing at the level he has been? Because I think he's sneaky older. I can't remember what he is.
Yeah, he's 32.
I think he's like, yeah. So like he kind of fits the age curve, but he's at a point where players like him who kind of rely more on athleticism and finesse, their game starts to get a little rickety as they get to like 32, 33, 34. So that's the main thing I'm going to be watching for him. Does he still have it? Can he still be that kind of a player? Or can he find a role like a Joe Ingles kind of a role, but maybe, on a lower level, I mean, not compared to Joe Ingles now, but like how Joe Ingles kind of sustained his career into his mid-30s and onwards as a similar kind of a player.
Yeah, I think with Boucher, you're looking at veteran minimum contracts from here on out. And what I want to see is, I think people, they just kind of give him the check mark of, well, he can shoot the ball. He can be a big that spaces the floor, but the numbers are pretty inconsistent throughout his career. And last season was the best. And so can he build off that? Can he be consistent? Can he duplicate it? Or does it just continue to be this thing that spikes up and down here and the Celtics don't get the right end of that stick? We'll have to see. So that's one thing to monitor, because Joe Mazzulla is certainly going to give him the green light to shoot, and it's going to be really important. And then you touched on something, Justin, that I wrote about for Hardwood Houdini, and that is that, yeah, he's the optimal role for Chris Boucher is to put him at the 4 next to a more traditional center. But the idea, I think the Celtics can have some really impactful stretches in games that could even change outcomes, where he's at the 5, and they're certainly not balanced, but they overcome those shortcomings in terms of size and what it means defensively and on the glass, with just how potent an offensive attack they can all of a sudden unleash. Where you talk about them wanting to play faster and with more tempo, they're running the floor with a center that can be a part of that can also shoot threes. And I think that can be a really dynamic offensive attack that can be a positive, at least at times, and be perhaps pretty consistent with that over the course of a season, where it's a lineup combination with Boucher at the 5 that proves worthy of Joe Mazzulla's trust.
Yeah, I feel like no one's really expecting Boucher to be here for the long run necessarily, but he should be able to fit in nicely, at least in this semi-gap year that the Celtics have. I mean, it's not a rebuild, as Brad said, it's more of a retooling period, but he's just a guy that could fill in the meantime. And another guy who will have a big opportunity that we actually talked about last episode with Nick from YouTube is Xavier Tillman Sr. I mean, he's also another sneaky veteran who's been in the league longer than you might think. Last year was not a strong year for him by any means. I mean, he dealt with some injury stuff and just was never really able to get in the rotation much. But this year, with no Porzingis, no Cornet, and the ball kind of up in the air with Queta and Boucher and Luka Garza, Tillman could have an opportunity maybe to at least play more. I don't think start. I wouldn't say start, but he could at least break into the rotation more. So what do you guys think about Tillman and this potentially pretty big year for him? You could start, Justin.
I think he's going to get a lot of minutes early in the season, and I really hope that they work out for him more than they have in the past, because I think that his career is in trouble at the NBA level if it doesn't start coming together for him. I know that injuries were a big part of what was going on with him, but he doesn't have the kind of track record that someone like Sam Hauser or, God forbid, Kristaps Porzingis has, where like you're willing to wait out the injury to see what kind of production you can squeeze out of in the future. He has shown some flashes that make him a really intriguing player, particularly on the defensive end of the ball with the switchability, which is something that the Celtics don't really have at all right now, other than him in their front court. But he's got to start producing. If he doesn't, as much as I think we all have at least a little bit of real estate on Tillman Island, it's going to become a bargain basement stock real fast if he doesn't start showing that he's recovered from whatever was ailing him.
Yeah, it's possible that last season set the tone for what the rest of his career is going to be. And if it's another year like that for him, then I would think he's out of the NBA. It's funny because Boucher is older than a lot of people think. Tillman is younger, but he also came into the league with concerns about his knees. And so that's a major factor here in what we might see. And to me, I look at it as this is someone who was consistently dependable. And even you go back to his final full season in Memphis, he's holding up against Anthony Davis in the playoffs and doing quite well. He's in the 99th percentile, I believe. He's certainly in the 90s. I know that for sure. I really do think it was the 90s in estimated plus minus in terms of defensive impact. Nerdy stat, I know, but 99th percentile is pretty darn good. And so, like you said, he gives them a big, which they need, just period, end of sentence, of one who can switch, who blocked Luka Doncic twice in the finals, He cannot hesitate to shoot threes. That can be quite frustrating to watch. And his track record from beyond the arc is not great either. But he's a pretty good passer, and he's a big body on screens who can free up these guys like Simons, Brown, Pritchard, White, Hauser, you name it, who are more reliable on that front. And he can contribute to, again, I think how they fare on the glass is a massive question mark / concern. He can be an important part of that solution, even if it's just boxing out bigger bodies to clear the lane for someone to go get the ball. He's got to prove himself, though. The other part of what happened, it wasn't just the knee injury. He talked with me at training camp last year about how even though he took a little bit of time away from the team during the playoffs, he didn't really have time to mourn the passing of his father. And that offseason was more a chance to be able to grieve and confront those emotions. And so I think it showed between the surgery, that aspect of it, and the truncated offseason that comes with winning a championship. And it all kind of played into this perfect storm of this is someone who has gone from being dependable year after year after year and being able to step up when called upon, whether it's the Celtics in the finals or the Grizzlies when there's an injury to someone ahead of him on the depth chart, to being someone who is watching J.D. Davison called up and play over him as he either sits the entire game out or he's just, getting in at the very end of the game as they empty the bench. So we'll have to see ultimately what this offseason looks like for him. We saw him at Summer League, and to my untrained eye, I thought that he looked to be in pretty good shape. But, of course, he's just walking up and down and going to his seat. He's not doing sprints or drills or anything. So we'll have to see if this offseason was about him getting back into the player that he's been throughout his NBA career, or, again, if what happened last season is the start of him, rapidly moving his way out of the NBA.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on his family. I forgot that. Given everything that happened to him personally, and just what he contributed to the Celtics. We talked about it with Nick. That Game 3 3-pointer, everyone in Celtics Nation is going to appreciate that. So I think everyone is going to be rooting for him next year, no matter how it shakes out. But now that we've gone through pretty much all the Celtics veterans, if you want to say, what do we think about the season on the whole? What is an ideal season for Boston in this weird gap year period? And what is maybe the worst case scenario? We'll let Bobby start with this one, our guest.
So the number that I put down is 45 wins. I think they're going to be right around that mark. And I don't know if they exceed it. I'm more skeptical of going over it, but 45 wins on the nose would not surprise me. I think that's firmly in play for this group. How do they handle losses and adversity and losing streaks, including Joe Mazzulla, is going to be fascinating to see. But I think that he's up for the challenge. I think that Jaylen Brown is up for the challenge because he's wanted this opportunity for so long. But that also ties into what is the worst case scenario here. And that, to me, is a major injury to a major part of this team's future. Whether, we all understand who the names are between Brown, White, Pritchard. If something happens that changes the landscape, especially if Tatum's recovering from an Achilles tear and Jaylen Brown, God forbid, suffers a major injury, that is once again a franchise-altering blow to the Celtics. And then as far as what matters the most to me, and it goes hand in hand with the, how many wins they get, but I'm less concerned about the win-loss column, is who proves themselves to be a meaningful part of this team's future and worthy of a spot and worthy of a role, not just a roster spot beyond this season. So you look at, can Jaylen Brown elevate those around him in a way where all of a sudden you can take some off of Jason Tatum's plate when he comes back? It's that much easier to lean on Jaylen Brown for some responsibilities that he either didn't have or didn't have much of when the two have been riding together. And then who else from this group, because we trust the Whites and the Pritchards of the world, but who else can show something, if any of them? It's possible you come out of this season and say center is a mess and you don't even feel great about someone like Keita or Garza as your number 2 option there, and Simons is gone and Boucher didn't give you anything and Minot was a miss. It's possible things go very negative on these fronts because, again, we can label it something more friendly to the team's years, but I think it's fair to call this a gap year, at least as far as title contention for sure. And the personnel-based moves this summer reflect that. Gaining flexibility was a priority, and what might come with that is that you didn't add someone who is a part of this team's long-term future. And we'll also see, lastly, a guy we haven't talked about is with Hugo Gonzalez. It's going to be a lot of growing pains for someone who was playing behind mostly fringe NBA players, and, in a dramatically different play style over there in the ACB. What do those growing pains look like? What's that maturation process? I wouldn't be surprised if he spends time in Maine, but ultimately when he's with the parent club, how does that go for him is going to be very interesting, because they did the smart decision. They took a home run swing late in the first round. What do they start to get on that return of investment in this rookie season for a raw prospect?
I'm going to try real hard not to think about what Liam McNeely on the Boston Celtics would be like. Real hard. But that doesn't mean that I don't believe that Hugo can be a really good player eventually. But next year, he's going to be bad. He might be better than we hope, but as a average NBA player, he's not going to be good. And there is the risk that the Celtics are once again a quote-unquote two-timeline team by design, right? Because I think all teams are going to have to start becoming two-timeline teams moving forward. And as we saw with the Celtics in the past, and as we are seeing right now with the team we started talking about in this podcast, the Golden State Warriors, the two-timeline thing doesn't work very well because the goals are very, very different. And the worst-case scenario could be that not only does everyone not have the same goals, and all the new, younger, prospective kind of players, developmental players, don't work out, as you were suggesting. One of the most important things the veterans can do this season, whether they win or lose, is still a winning culture. That doesn't mean that you win, but it does mean that you play like you are going to win every night. That may not happen in such a scenario as I'm describing, with the two-time disaster, everything doesn't work, all that stuff, and could bleed into, we talked about this last week, I think, about how that could affect Joe Mazzulla and his future with the team and how well he gets along with the other players on the roster. The cascading effects of things not going the right way, quote unquote. Like a lot of people say, oh, it's going to be fine. If they do bad, they're just going to get a better draft pick and blah, 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 blah. That's not necessarily true. Hopefully it is, because if it goes bad, at least you get that little silver lining, right? But there's more risk baked into this coming season, I think, than people really want to talk about and admit, given everything that's happened recently from the New York Knicks series onwards. I'm hopeful that there are a lot of paths with a capable and professional organization like the Celtics to exceed our expectations, never mind avoid the worst case scenario. But we do need to keep in mind that things could go a lot worse than we think, that basically the way that we've been talking about this season.
Yeah, I think both you guys make a good point about Joe Mazzulla and kind of the losing habits, because just like winning can kind of snowball, so can losing. And like you're saying, Justin, it's a long regular season. This is 82 games. A lot of fans online are like, oh yeah, we can just like simulate it like it's NBA 2K and get to the next one. But like, okay, whatever. Maybe they go like 30 and 52. It's like, well, those are still like losses every night that the players are experiencing and that the young guys are experiencing. And that can be maybe a little demoralizing at the least. And that's not something the Celtics ever want in their culture. I mean, it's quite clear from Wyc Grousbeck to Brad Stevens to, well, now Bill Chisholm. Winning is a part of everything. Even when they're not expected to win, they still want to put out a competitive team and do their best to contend. So I don't think it's realistic to just assume that everything's going to be fine if they just kind of punt the season. So I think a worst case scenario would be kind of letting those things build up. And of course, any injury to their main core would be pretty disastrous and would pretty much end the season effectively. But I would say maybe best case scenario, they could crack the top 6 of the playoffs. I really don't see them advancing that far. I mean, the East is totally up for grabs. We can't really predict what's going to happen. Like, will Giannis even stay? I don't know. There is just a lot going on in the East, and we don't really know how that's going to shake out. But I think it's realistic that the Celtics could at least extend their playoff streak. Will they go as far as they have in recent seasons? No. But I don't think many fans expect that. And I think it would be okay anyways, because the ultimate goal is next season. But with that being said, unless you guys have anything to add, I think we can probably wrap this up and get into something to remember or something to forget. But I don't know if you guys have any other points on the season at large. No?
Also, I think we did a pretty good job hitting on everything there.
Yeah, no, it's true. I guess I can start with something to forget. I think I've said something similar to this before, but just this lull of the offseason. I mean, for Celtics news, like there has not been much happening at all. I saw this this clip of Tatum giving like his top 5 like NBA players ever. I'm like, oh well, this is like an interesting clip. And it turns out it was like from 4 years ago. I'm like, oh man, we're this desperate that we're like recycling content from years ago. Like, wow, people in the NBA world, especially Celtics fans, are bored at the moment. But thankfully,
I just wrote an article about the very first Celtics coach and how he discovered somebody before the NBA existed. So yeah, heard.
yeah, especially the writing side of things has been a little tough. But hey, the season's almost here, so just about a month. So better days ahead.
Yeah, Daniel, I'm certainly with you there because I saw a clip circulating of Payton Pritchard talking about the Olympics, and that was from a couple of years ago or last year, and that was starting to gain some traction. So I think the NBA world in general, but especially if you're not heavily invested in the Jonathan Kuminga situation, e.g., you're not a Warriors fan or a Kings fan who's praying that he ultimately ends up in Sacramento, I think you're looking for whatever you can get your hands on right now. And that in particular is why having Eurobasket recently was such a godsend.
Yeah. But something to remember, forget, Justin?
Yeah, my something to remember is that Blue Sky exists. It's a great community to talk about basketball in a moment where our traditional watering hole named after a one hick from French Lick is not such a great place, and unfortunately it's probably reflecting a lot of what's going on in the rest of the world. But at least in my experience in Blue Sky, people are nicer, and I encourage y'all to take some time, hang out with us there.
And then Bobby, something to remember or forget.
Something to forget is becoming how the Red Sox season ends. It wasn't that I thought they would win the World Series by any means, but the Roman Anfernee injury, Daniel, is just so devastating because now they maybe put 1 run on the board. Maybe it's 2, but just they lose to bad teams all of a sudden. It's not competitive. And the worst part of it is that it's lining up for them to get locked into a postseason series with the Yankees when they're not capable of winning that series unless the pitching is just lights out on a consistent basis. And if that doesn't happen, and by the way, it could, and the offense still might not be able to come through for them, then you're looking at in the same year, the Red Sox lose to the Yankees and the Celtics lose to the Knicks. And that's going to be a gut punch for a lot of people on the wrong end of that equation.
Did they win tonight? I know before we started recording, it was like 4-4, I think.
That's the last I saw. I don't know what the final was.
I will do a quick Google to see, but that is a good point. They did win. Okay, nice. 5-4.
Yeah, they won.
But Boston needs some positive sports momentum because
indeed
we're not getting it from the Bruins, I don't think. The Patriots, okay, they're coming off a week 2 win. Let's see what we have there, I guess. I still don't think they're going to make the playoffs, honestly. And then the Celtics, as we've talked about at length, got the semi-gap year going on. But maybe the Red Sox can offer some reprieve. But yeah, like you were saying, Bobby, that Roman Anfernee injury hurts a lot. And I feel like the Red Sox have just had untimely injuries like the last few years, which have really hurt their momentum.
Yeah, to me, this season was just enjoy the ride, and whatever happens in the playoffs, so be it. It's like they're playing with house money, and then the Roman Anthony injury, and it's like, I want to get off the ride. The ride is over. I'm done with the ride.
Yeah. Well, Red Sox talk will continue as the hopeful playoff push happens. But Celtics talk, of course, will continue right here and elsewhere. Justin, where else is it going to happen for you?
I mean, if you have found this, you found a good chunk of the non-written stuff that I do. The written stuff, of course, we both write for Celtics Wire USA Today. You can find this and all of our other stuff there.
Yeah, and what about you, Bobby? Where can people find your stuff?
So like Justin said, shout out to Blue Sky, a phenomenal platform. You can find me over there as well as on X at this name, at Bobby Kravitsky on both platforms. And then as far as the written work, over at Forbes and Hardwood Houdini.
Nice. And as Justin mentioned, you can find some of my stuff at Celtics Wire or Clutch Points, or just Google my name. It'll come up. And I'm at Daniel at Daniel D1214 on Twitter. I'm not calling it X. And I think I'm Daniel Dawn 1214 on Blue Sky. I'm not as active on that, but I might be as the new season starts. Yeah, I think you're right, Justin. It's a better place at the moment. But unless you guys have anything to add, I think this should wrap up another episode of Havlicek Stole the Pod. Anything?
Always a pleasure.
Okay, yeah. See you guys next time, and thanks for listening and watching.